Welcome everyone. This is once again your host Shailesh bringing you live NZ World News. Always positive, always try to bring the real information from real people. And today we have the honor of inviting one of a prominent personalities which doesn't need any introduction, but I will still have to introduce as a matter of fact. But yeah, Phil Goff, the Honorable Phil Goff, who has been an instrumental in New Zealand politics, but not just New Zealand politics. I think he has touched many lives because I am one of the witness. So I can strongly talk about that. But today we are going to talk about when we talk about relationships and communities and engagements of people to people, which he is quite instrumental because he almost, I wouldn't say ruled, but he really won the hearts of the people in Mount Roskill and in New Zealand and internationally. So he wore various hats in his career. I think it goes back, well, if I'm not wrong, 4.5 decades, like maybe almost 5 decades. Now you are in politics,
It's been
which
a
is,
long time.
yeah, a lot of time. But today's topic to all the listeners is a very critical and very prominent to understand and to talk about it and not hide about it. Because this is the reality that we are facing today is the war. And I think nobody likes to have a war, but everybody likes to have peace. So today I'm going to discuss about the effect on New Zealand, which has been always a peaceful and always a country where people like to see to come and visit and not just visit but stay here because sheerly because of its nature, the way it is pure, as we say, what can you get more than better? So we are going to discuss a lot of things today about the war's effect that has happened on New Zealand. So welcome, Phil Goff. This is my first interview with you in terms of the topics that we want to cover. But I think your expertise, your experience, we need more of involvement of people going back who have been there, done there. So first, let me ask you this simple question. What is your take on this war? Why have we come to this?
This, I think, is a war of choice. It's not a war of necessity.
Mm,
Trump has chosen to embark on the attack on Iran at the urging of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It's clear why Netanyahu wants the war. He regards Iran as a threat. Iran is opposed to Israel, and he wants to try to crush Iran, crush any attempt that it might have to build its nuclear program and to destroy the leadership.
mm,
Why would the United States buy into this?
mm,
Well, it's always very hard to tell when you have a president who is volatile, who is totally engrossed with his own position,
mm,
maybe to the extent that he wants to distract from the release of the Epstein files, which may reflect badly on him, maybe because his popularity is starting to decline in
mm,
the United States. But the apparent reason that President Trump has given is that he said that Iran was about to launch a strike on the United States.
mm,
Doesn't really bear much credibility. No country that's 20th as powerful as the other side is going to launch an attack and start a war. And there is no evidence to back up President Trump's claim, no evidence at all.
that's
Then
right.
he says that Iran was about to develop a nuclear weapon. Well, the International Atomic Energy Agency said there is absolutely no evidence of that. The United States' own military intelligence says there is no evidence that they could launch a ballistic missile, nuclear armed missile attack on the United States before 2036 at the earliest. And if then, of course, President Trump was telling us in the State of the Union address just a few days before he launched the attack that he had totally obliterated Iran's nuclear facility. So those reasons don't stack up. Uh, President Trump is the person who wants to show how strong a leader he is, how America can control anything that happens in the world. And this is about, I think, about him and about his desire to control yet another country, as he recently attempted in Venezuela, that has a control on the supply of oil to the world. It's a war's always a shame, because people get killed, and there are a
Yeah.
couple of thousand people probably killed already in this war. A lot of destruction happens, and a lot of disruption happens to other countries around the world, including New Zealand and of course India. And that disruption at the moment we are seeing in rising oil prices, not quite as um, terrible as they were yesterday, but bad enough to create a new spike in inflation for New Zealand, to slow economic growth, to
Mm,
threaten our supply chain, to make our recovery, our economic recovery, slower.
mm,
And of course, a very interesting situation with India,
mm.
because Trump slapped 50% tariffs on India because it was buying oil off Russia.
That's
Um,
correct.
India agreed to cut back its purchases from Russia. And now the United States is saying they're going to lift the sanctions against buying oil off Russia because you can no longer get oil through the Straits of Hormuz and from Iran. So inconsistent policy from the United States. It is about trying to change the regime. I'm not a defender of the Iraqi regime. I think the Iraqi regime is a terrible regime. But if you look at history, which you mentioned before,
Mm,
you look at where the United States has tried regime change. I'm thinking of Iraq, I'm thinking of Afghanistan, I'm thinking of Libya. In every case, they have failed to achieve the objectives they've set for themselves.
mm,
You've ended up with chaos. As General David Petraeus from the United States said, without the invasion of Iraq, you wouldn't have had ISIS and the terrorist movement that developed out of ISIS.
true.
So I see no benefit from this war. I see further risk from it, and I see damage, death, and disruption that's going to affect all of us in a negative way.
But one important thing that I have noticed in during that since COVID, we always talked about economy, the disruption, the lower, slower, all sorts of economies, and now war. And New Zealand is a small economy when it compares to other, but still it's very critical, very important for many of the countries, many of the larger countries, I would say, whether it is India, whether it is America, whether it is Canada, all of that. Still, New Zealand has been valued and New Zealand has valued this, whether it's sports, whether it is, so economies are very important for New Zealand. And this war, in your view, and as a diplomat, as a foreign minister, also you have been there. What do you see now New Zealand's future in the economy recovery, in the economy stability, in the economy resilience, that when we talk about that due to war? Is it going to be a big, long time before we really come to the terms of economy?
Well, the impact on our economy and on the world economy will really depend on how long this war goes on.
Right.
Um, President Trump said it'd be over in a matter of days, and then it was a matter of weeks. Well, we're well into the second week now.
Mm,
But he will be seeing the impact this is having on business and consumer confidence, on the price of oil, on inflation generally.
mm,
He goes to his midterm congressional elections in November of this year,
right.
so he won't want that disruption to continue. If
Mm,
the disruption continues, then we will absolutely see a really negative impact. I saw it today when I filled up my car with petrol. I was
mm,
paying
right.
30 or 40 cents more than I would
Yeah.
normally have been paying for my petrol. But if that becomes entrenched, and particularly if you've seen the Israeli bombing of the refineries in Iran, causing
Yes.
massive environmental pollution and damage to people's health, but also restricting the flow of oil from Iran into the international markets. Um, that will have an impact. It will have a direct impact on our inflation rate, and it will slow our recovery. So the
Mm,
government in New Zealand, the Luxon government, certainly doesn't want to see this happening,
mm,
but they haven't quite had the courage to say that
mm,
what President Trump is doing is
mm,
actually contrary both to international law and contrary to the fundamental principles of the United Nations Charter, which almost every reputable constitutional lawyer in the world will affirm that this is not a legitimate action. It was not taken because there was a specific and imminent threat
Mm,
to either international security or to the United States. It was if I use the pun, a trumped up charge,
mm,
um, as it was actually in the war in Iraq. If you can
mm.
remember back to 2003, Shailesh,
Yeah.
you will know that the pretext for the invasion of Iraq was
Mm,
that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction.
mm.
We said, and I was minister at the time, foreign minister,
Yes.
we said there's absolutely no evidence of that. Our intelligence sources say there is no evidence. The international organisation UNMIVIC set up, headed by a guy called Hans Blix, told me personally on the phone there is no evidence of this. They invaded, they searched high and low, they found nothing.
Mm.
So it was a false pretext for the war, and the pretext for this war is equally false.
Absolutely. So I remember, like when Helen Clark's government, we were always have a stand that we don't want interference of international political. We don't want any nuclear issues, and we were very firm on it. In my view now, things have changed quite a bit compared to what it was that we stood for or what we were standing for our own opinions, suggestions, whatever. But now the government, do you think the courage, you mentioned the word courage, and it's not just here. I've seen everywhere in the world. Not every leader has got that courage to face up to the realities. How do you
Yeah,
see this in New Zealand's role?
yeah. Well, look, we're dealing with effectively a playground bully in
Yeah,
President Trump.
yeah.
If he doesn't get his way, he threatens.
That's
So he threatens and then he imposes tariffs on India. He did the
right.
same with Brazil because he didn't think
Mm,
Brazil should prosecute its former leader for corruption, though he was clearly a corrupt leader, but he was also pro-Trump.
mm,
He threatens Canada. He didn't threaten New Zealand, but he still slapped 15% tariffs on us,
mm,
saying it was reciprocal. Now, the
mm,
word reciprocal means if you do something to me, I'll do something back. Our
mm.
tariffs on the United States are less than 1%. He
Yeah,
imposed 15% tariffs on New Zealand, which were
yeah,
reciprocal. Now, our government, in common with many governments around the world,
yeah.
think that you can pacify a bully by going along with them, not objecting to what they say, even when you know that it's a lie, not going along with them, even though you know that what they are doing is wrong. That won't change a bully. That will only make the bully want to bully even more.
Mm,
I thought Prime Minister Carney's speech at Davos was a good speech,
yeah,
saying that people have got to stand up for what they believe in. And New
that's right.
Zealand, as a small country, always did have the courage of its convictions.
That's
And
correct.
I had a bit of a go at Foreign Minister Peters on the basis that
Mm,
Trump had said,
mm,
apart from the United States, all of the other countries that committed troops to Afghanistan hung back from the front line as if they were
mm,
too cowardly to go out and fight. Well, we
mm.
lost 10 New Zealand service people in Afghanistan. I lost my nephew killed in action in Afghanistan. And for
Right.
this guy that dodged the draft 5 times to
Mm,
accuse other countries who lost literally thousands of soldiers in Afghanistan
mm,
effectively of cowardice was a gross insult. It was absolutely wrong factually. It was a total falsehood.
mm,
And Winston Peters never once criticised the
mm,
comment that he made that caused so much hurt to the families of those New Zealanders who died in Afghanistan. And
mm.
I said to him, I used rather coarse language. I said that he needed to have some balls.
Yeah.
He needed to stand up and say that's wrong,
Mm,
that's insulting. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, did that, even though
mm,
he's bent over backwards to try to accommodate Trump.
mm.
That was a gross insult to our people who died, and our
Absolutely.
government was silent.
Mm,
And Peters to this day still has not issued a word of criticism of something
mm.
he knew to be a lie, that he knew to be insulting, and that he knew to be hurtful to the veterans that fought in Afghanistan and the families of those who died there. Now,
Right.
I think we need to, look, I know what diplomacy is about. I've been a diplomat, I've been a foreign minister, but you do not simply accept when people lie to you so blatantly, and you don't cringe to another country because it's more powerful. You stand up for your own interests and you stand up for your own values. And
Mm.
sadly, New Zealand hasn't done that.
Yeah. So in terms of the diplomacy, I wanted to ask you, like India has got different political parties, many political parties and many ideologies, but America has got two major, Republic and Democratic. Now, have you seen in your experience that as the democratic views, when it comes to the national interest, when it comes to the democracy, when it comes to all the what you call it, relationship building. Has there been a huge difference between Republic Party and a Democratic like America, what Trump is doing today? He's putting
Mm.
his ideology, but
Yeah, well, I've dealt with both Republican administrations and Democratic administrations. I dealt with,
yeah,
met with Bill Clinton when he was president.
right.
I dealt with Colin Powell, who was the Secretary of State under George W. Bush. I got a personal handwritten letter from President Bush when my nephew was killed in Afghanistan. Um, I didn't necessarily agree with what the Republicans were doing or the Democrats, but
Mm,
they were adults. They behaved, excuse me, in an adult way. I
mhm,
have never seen the nature of leadership,
mm,
so-called leadership, that we are seeing from President Trump. He's
right.
like a 5-year-old in an
Mm,
80-year-old's body.
mm,
It's an awful mixture that conjures up an awful vision in your mind.
right.
But he simply throws his toys out of the cot when he doesn't get his own way. He lacks any sense of understanding of the world. He came out and in regard to the war in the Ukraine, he just lied about it. He said that Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, was a dictator, but never made that accusation against Putin. Well,
That's right.
Putin has just been found to have murdered,
Mm,
poisoned his last opponent for the presidency. Putin is a dictator that throws people in jail that criticize him or has them murdered, that is one of the most corrupt politicians and richest politicians in the world. Not a word of criticism from Donald Trump about Vladimir Putin. And then
mm,
he said that Ukraine started the war, not Russia.
mm.
Well, you and I and everybody listening to this program saw
Yeah.
the tanks rolling in across the Russian border, heading towards Kiev. We all know, as a matter of the blindingly obvious, that it
Mhm,
was Russian aggression against Ukraine, a country a third of its size,
mm,
and yet Trump lied about that. And then he wanted the Ukraine to give up its territory and to effectively surrender on Russian terms.
mm.
Now, that's what got me into trouble when I was in London, because
Yes.
I remembered what Winston Churchill. Now, Trump is very fond of quoting Churchill, and he's got a bust of Churchill in the Oval Office. But
Mm,
Churchill, when Great Britain and France gave in to Hitler at the Munich conference in 1938 and sacrificed Czechoslovakia to the Nazis,
right.
Churchill said to Neville Chamberlain, who was the then British Prime Minister, who came home waving a piece of paper saying, "Peace in our time," he said, "You had the choice
Mm,
between dishonor and war. You chose dishonor and you'll have war." Because Churchill knew that if you appease
mhm,
an aggressor, you don't discourage them from their aggression, you encourage them.
mm,
And what effectively Trump has done in Ukraine is to encourage Putin, um, and not put the pressure on Putin that his predecessor, President Biden, did. Biden, I think, had an honourable position on Ukraine. He said, "This is a case of a fundamental breach of the United Nations Charter, a powerful country invading a smaller country. It's aggression. It's contrary to the UN Charter, and we are going to support Ukraine against Russia."
right.
And we did in New Zealand, and the United Kingdom did, and most of Europe did. So we haven't seen a leader like Trump before. He's even worse than he was in his first administration,
Mm,
because he surrounded himself with yes
mm,
men and women, I should say, who
yeah.
never contradict him, who never tell him the truth, who never tell him when he's wrong. And
mm.
so he keeps blundering on, making mistakes that are damaging to his own country and to the world.
So this is a very tricky question. Like you've been there, done there in New Zealand when it comes to New Zealand leaders, different kinds of leaders you have seen. And today, the leadership that we see today, there are three leaders because there are three political parties, literally, because they connect, they discuss, and then they decide about the international response, so-called. In your in your view, do you think that we are capable of, because when you saw with your own, when you were a diplomat and Winston Peters made that comment, I'm just trying to link that do you think the leadership that we have now, if they can undermine our own people when it comes to America, is it something that this leadership is capable of handling Trump at this point? What is your view on it? What's your opinion on it?
Well, I think we all saw last week the
Mm,
horrible mess that Christopher Luxon made of trying to explain New Zealand's position on
mm,
Iran.
mm.
Now, look, I quite like Christopher Luxon as a person. I
Yeah.
worked with him before he became prime
Right.
minister.
Mhm.
I got on quite well with him,
Mm,
um, but it was a hopelessly inadequate performance.
mm,
It did not show the leadership that we want from our leaders,
mm,
and nor will we get that from Winston Peters.
mm,
Peters is like Trump in that they both regard themselves as populist.
mm,
And now let's get on to what that leads to.
mhm,
Trump has, of course, launched
mm,
a pretty horrible campaign in deporting people who
mm,
he says are criminals,
mhm,
who most of them might be illegally in the United States, but they're not criminals. They're not committing criminal acts.
mm.
And he has won political support in the election campaign by a campaign against migrants. Now, Winston Peters is doing just that same thing.
Mm.
And, you know, I was in Parliament with Winston Peters for 30 years, more than 30 years. And
Yes.
I've seen him in action, and he's done it before. In the 1990s, when we were getting people coming from China and India, he talked about the Asian invasion. You know,
Mm,
so the people that were coming here were not hardworking migrants wanting to
mm.
make a better life for themselves and their kids and to contribute to their new country. They
Yeah.
were invading our country. They were a threat to us. And I saw the comments that his deputy, Shane Jones, made just a couple of weeks ago. And let me see if because I want to make sure I quote him correctly. I don't
Mhm.
want to be misleading.
Sure.
This is what he said. This is on the News Talk ZB program, The Country.
Mhm.
Quote, "We are not going to be a dumping ground for people trying to come to New Zealand and set up New Delhi."
Mm.
End quote. Then, new quote, "Unfettered immigration is
Mm.
going to fundamentally change the trajectory and character of our nation."
Mm.
Now, end quote. Peters and Jones, in this case, are
Yeah.
both appealing to prejudice,
Mm.
albeit by a minority of people, but a minority enough to make sure they get re-elected by winning their support against migrants. The idea that, you know, migrants are the cause of the problem in New Zealand, rather than the migrants are actually a very positive factor in helping build our country in so many ways. I remember in the
Mm.
old days when the racists used to talk about having too many Asians in our hospitals. And I
Yeah.
said, I agree with you. I agree with you. The doctors, the nurses, the wards maids, go
Mm.
into any hospital and see who is doing the work in the hospitals, and they will be people who are migrants. Winston Peters used to tell me that the crime rate. You asked questions of me when I was Minister of Justice in Parliament about the crime rate of Asians, and I pointed out to him that on a per head of population base, the crime rate of Asians in New Zealand was half the level of the population as a whole. But he
Mm.
still persisted in creating the impression that crime was being caused by migrants.
Yeah.
This is racist. This is nonsense. They
Mm.
don't actually believe it, but the people that listen to them and follow them do believe it. And
Yeah.
that creates a
That,
really bad situation in our country when we should be
correct.
we're all part of the same country. We're all have in common our humanity. The difference in ethnicity or religion,
Yeah.
those things don't matter much. Um, Treat people with respect, all people,
Mm.
and don't be prejudiced against people because of their background or their religion. Those are fundamental principles of how decent human beings relate to each other. And New Zealand First doesn't follow those principles. And the National Party, its coalition partner, is absolutely silent when they hear their coalition partner talking this racist nonsense. And it's got to be called out. And people have got to stand up against that because it's damaging to our country. It's
I
unfair to the people it's directed against. It's untrue. And
mm,
it's all just straight self-serving politics by the
absolutely.
populist New Zealand First Party. So when people go to the polls in November,
Mm,
remember who spouts that sort of nonsense that's damaging to them.
mhm,
Remember who doesn't stand up
mhm,
against that nonsense. And I want to say, look, I'm a Labor person, so maybe I'm biased, but I
mm,
listened to Chris Hipkins, the other Chris, in
mhm,
Parliament the other day,
mhm.
just saying it straight like that, and saying that this is racism, it's nonsense, it's got to come to an end, and National should be doing something to silence their coalition partner. Now, I give full marks to Chris Hipkins for having the courage to stand up and do that, to say the right thing, to speak the truth.
But also, I think I remember 25 years ago, I remember your words to me personally. I have never forgotten that Shailesh, we all are migrants in this country.
Yeah,
We all have
absolutely.
to contribute. I can't forget that. And I keep telling to everyone, don't think you are isolated because when you come here, we have accepted here as a citizen resident. That means you are one of them. And so you are coming from different, but that's all we are. I remember your words like, you may be only 1 year here, but I'm here 40 years. That's the only difference. So,
Yeah, yeah.
but we are all
That,
migrants. So
no, that's absolutely true, and it's even true of the Mana Whenua Maori people. They were originally migrants here,
that's right.
albeit that they didn't take the country over from any other human being.
Yeah.
But we all came here, and we all came here for the same reason.
Mm.
And you know, from my view of life now, having been involved in politics for a very long time and in
Yeah.
international politics, one of the
Yeah.
most damaging things in
Mhm.
the political world is for people to appeal to prejudice to
Mhm.
advance themselves.
Mhm.
Uh, it's dishonest, it's damaging, it's
Mhm.
hurtful, and it's untrue. And look, I've got my family is a United Nations, so I've got
Yeah.
grandkids that are part Asian, part Maori.
That's
I've
right.
got my nephew's expecting his first baby, and his wife is an Indian lass from my old electorate of Mount Roskill, and we're all part of one family,
Mm.
literally. But as a country, we
Mm.
are also one family. We are here in
Mm.
common as New Zealanders. And the
Yes.
first thing that you do is treat every other human being with respect and
Mm.
and not base your views on them on prejudice. There are plenty of bad people in the world. It's not
Mm.
based on their race or their religion. They're just
Mm.
bad people. There are even more
Absolutely.
good people in the world, and equally, that's not based on their race or religion. This is set out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights
Mm.
that we signed up to many,
Mm.
many decades ago.
Yeah.
And if we want a better world and we want a better society, then we rubbish that sort of prejudice
Mm.
and politicking, and we say no. We are all equal in this country as New Zealanders, and we
Yeah.
are all equally deserving of the respect that we deserve from each other to each other.
I think very well said, Phil, because I remember that if we are instrumental in having free trade agreements with every country that we want, what does it tell you? That we want all migrants from
Mm.
everywhere. We want to be engaged with us. And that's the principle that you started, I remember, free trade China agreement. And that was one of the instrumental policy that we instigated. But not, after that, now we have made so many free trade agreements. But that starting point was you. And what it tells me that with this war, I want to come back and finally to this war thing that we are talking about. is we want every country to come here and contribute and not just as war survivors or war things.
Mhm.
So, in your view, lastly, I want to ask you, what is our government stand would be, if at all, if Trump tomorrow says, because we are listening and the world is listening to him to some part, to some extent, because of the bullying that he does. What do you think if he asks for troops that we New Zealand is very much against sending troops to Iraq when Helen last time? What do you
Yeah.
think if that happens now?
Well,
Would we
we declined to send troops to Iraq because we
Mm,
did not believe that that war was necessary. We did
correct.
send troops to Afghanistan, and it was
Yeah.
obvious why we sent troops to Afghanistan
Hmm.
because Al Qaeda were based as guests of the Taliban in Afghanistan, and
Hmm.
they had launched not one but many terrorist attacks around the world in a lot of different countries, sometimes in Africa, sometimes in Asia, sometimes, and finally on 9/11 in the United States.
Yeah.
And there was a real threat, and we needed to deal with it. But we
Yeah.
will not sacrifice the lives of New Zealanders
Mm,
where there is not a good cause
mm,
to fight to protect your values and your interests.
yeah.
So we wouldn't have I don't think even the current government would have a bar of sending troops to Iran. Not even Trump is planning to do that.
Mm,
He will bomb the hell out of them, but he won't put boots on the ground. He'll
mm,
pretend that he's going for regime change, but he's already got a regime change, a new leader who's more hardline and less acceptable than the one that he replaced. Let me just finish on the free trade agreement that you mentioned before.
yes, yes.
Um, Winston Peters, of course, opposed the free trade agreement with China. He said it would be bad for New Zealand. Well, it
Mm,
took our trade with China
mm,
from two-way trade from 3 billion a year
mm,
to well over 30 billion a year, and
mm,
it turned the balance of the trade in favor of New Zealand as
mm.
against China.
That's
I
correct.
started the process for the free trade agreement a very long time ago with a Minister of Commerce called Kamal Nath
Mm,
from India.
mm,
Um, and I think that the free trade agreement with India is a good idea.
mm.
It's not as strong as the free trade agreement I got out of China because
Yeah,
they removed all tariffs on everything over time. But it's still important that we have a free trade agreement with an economy that's going to be the third biggest economy in the world and one of the fastest growing.
yeah.
And we want to develop a good relationship with India,
Mm.
even if they beat us at T20 cricket, so
T20
so
cricket.
uh, so overwhelmingly as they did the other night. But and so Peters has never apologised for having it wrong on the free trade agreement with China, and the only reason he's against the free trade agreement with India is because he thinks he can make some political capital out of
Mm,
saying thousands and thousands of Indians are going to flood New Zealand, which is
mm,
not true under the terms of the agreement. The temporary employment entry visa allows for 1,667 people to come each year. They may or may not bring a partner or family. It's a 3-year visa.
mm,
And the student visa, which allows 1,000 students to come here, it's not a student visa, it's
mm.
a working holiday scheme visa.
Yeah.
It's 1,000 students. They're here for only 1 year.
Mm,
With the United Kingdom,
mm.
there's an unlimited number of people that come and they're allowed here for 3 years. Did
So
Winston
true.
Peters or Shane Jones get up and say, "Oh, we're going to be flooded with people from Britain"? No, this was a straight racist attack on India. So for every member of our Indian community listening to this,
Mm,
do not forget
mm,
what Winston Peters and Shane Jones and the New Zealand First Party is doing. And do not forget that
mm.
the national government, the biggest party in this coalition government, has been silent about the rubbish that Peters and Jones has been speaking,
Right.
because silence is complicity. It's unacceptable.
I think that is a very good points you raised about the FTA because that will be yet to be seen. The detail, as they say, devil is in the detail. Whether it will be helping New Zealand just the way China agreement helped us, is it going to help us, or is it going to be another, just a slogan or just a document? to say that we have an agreement. So that we will come back to that. I think we need an exclusive topic on that, Phil. Phil, FTA is going to be really my interesting up my alley because, as I said, like businesses over here are struggling, and if they can get the benefit of FTA for with any country, then it is a great initiative to help have that kind of agreement that will trickle down to the businesses in New Zealand to develop them, grow them. And FTA is another thing is we also wanted to see FTA and your views on the creativity because we have got access to the Indian we have still not got the access to the Indian film industry or the Bollywood or the entertainment industry where can make a huge economic growth for both the countries. And it can develop our creatives just like our cricketers did very well with India. They go and play.
Yeah.
And I think India and New Zealand will never get to the wrong side like India, Pakistan. So I'm pretty good about that. Whenever New Zealand wins, Indians cheer as well. I've seen that. Even there was a photo yesterday of the match that went. Harshdeep and that another our cricketer, they were just hugging each other after that, and it was such a
Mm.
good scene to see that. And that relation we don't have with Australia, we don't have with Pakistan, or we don't have with England, but we do have that relation with New Zealand. So good on that,
Yeah.
basically. Whoever wins.
But one of the abiding memories I have from being in India was when Richard Hadley invited me up into the commentary box
Uh-huh.
when there was a test match. I think it was in New Delhi, and then
Mm.
he invited me to talk about it. And I love cricket, but I'm not an expert in it. And I
Yeah.
said, "But how big's the audience?" And he said, "Oh, only about 200 million." But yeah, no, it was very interesting. Just the next day in the hotel, the
Mm.
lady that was cleaning my room in the hotel was
Mhm.
giving me almost a blow by blow account of what had happened in the cricket match that I'd been watching, and who had bowled what sort of ball, and how well they'd done. And I thought, gosh, what I didn't realize was that cricket is actually a religion in India.
Yeah.
Everybody follows it, and there's an amazing passion for it.
I think I have another project that coming up I would like to have with regards to the cricket because Sunil Gavaskar in India in trying to do that project with me as well. And he said that let's see if we can bring more close ties between India and New Zealand with on the basis of the cricket, on the basis of, lots of things that expertise skills can be transferred over. It is not
Mm.
always the products and services. It is always the skills and the expertise like where you are doing today. Your experience matters to the generations that we are now so that the future generation could be better. With that
Mm.
note, I think I want to ask you lastly about the war. Um, it's uncertain when it's going to stop. But the question is, it's going to hurt. The economy has hurted New Zealand since COVID and after COVID. Also, the government said that we will change. The inflation has not changed to that level. It is still growing worse. When it comes to that kind of scenario now, and with the war not certain, how do you think that now the people that are hurting most now currently are leaving as well? But to sustain them, make them stay in our country, not affected by the war or anything, because that's the thing. And as you said, petrol prices are going up. Same is happening in India as well, everywhere, in fact. But in terms of what our economy, what our politicians needs to do and leadership needs to be, is to help and support every single individual and to make them comfortable and confident about creating new things. What's last thing you need to happen with the war in the middle, but hurting is there already? How do we minimize that risk and hurts to the people? This is a very
Yeah.
humanitarian question.
Well, as I said before, the war will have, if it continues for much longer, will have a really unfortunate effect on inflation. But the inflation was there already, as you pointed out
Mm.
just now.
Yes. Yeah.
The food prices in the year to January 2026 went up 4.6%. And they are basic items that people need to live on. And
Mm.
that's why I think the government has been polling badly because
Mm.
people remember the promise. that was made that the cost of living would be brought under control.
Mm.
Um, and sometimes there are factors outside any government's
True.
control. For Labor, it was the effect of COVID. For this government, it's partly the effect of the
Oh,
war at the moment.
yeah.
But they have not got on top of the inflationary problems and the
Mm.
cost of living problems, and they
Mm.
haven't got the economic growth that we need. And I think what politicians of all political parties need to do is forget about the stuff that they often campaign on, which
Mm.
isn't that important, and focus on how you can increase the productivity in this country, how you can get the investment into this country, how you can get innovation, how you can encourage our technological development. And that's where the free
Right.
trade agreement, hopefully with India, will help. When I was High Commissioner in London,
Mm.
the fastest growing export to the United Kingdom was actually technological products.
Mm.
So, New Zealanders have got that skill, and
That's
we
good.
need a government that gets behind and
Yeah.
encourages uh, research and development, encourages the skill training levels that we need, works with the private sector to help with marketing. Those are the things that we need to make our economy longer. But we better not get onto that because I'm
No,
I'm
no,
due
no,
somewhere
no.
else at the moment.
No,
Um,
we will. We
so
will. No, thanks very much, Phil. This is amazing that what you said to all the listeners. This is one of the expertise that we need to always, have a dialogue with. So thank you so much, Phil, for this beautiful conversation I had with you today about the Iran war and its impact on New Zealand. And I think all listeners, all the politicians, all the leaderships who will be listening will be definitely taking into account that how do we make better and better more our country. So just on that positive note, once again, thank you, Phil, for this beautiful opportunity to talk about war.
it's a
And
pleasure.
it's not war.
I only wish we
Thank
didn't have to talk about war. Okay,
Exactly.
Shailesh,
All
thank you
right.
very much for your time. Go
Thank
well.
you. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye for now.